whether or not it's a fetish, and I pretty much think nearly 100% of the time it is. There might be a few exceptions where it isn't a fetish, but let's say I'm totally wrong, and it's the most wholesome, wonderful journey into their true selves. What HR have been doing is saying to women, we don't care what you think. We're not even going to ask you. We are telling you that you have to accept these men as women. Now, I think that's where it goes from being inclusive, happy, lovely, wonderful, aren't we so kind to these men, to a real infringement of women's rights in the workplace. And I think that's where we are.
Welcome to This Isn't Working, the podcast for employers and employees who think it's time to talk about the failings of workplace culture and how we can do better. I'm your host, Tanya de Grunwald, an HR commentator who's watching, listening, and hopefully asking the right questions. Okay, let's get this working. Okay, hi everybody. So today we're going to talk about women's rights in the workplace. In particular, we'll explore whether employers' attempts at what we've been calling trans inclusion have created unintended consequences, resulting in female employees feeling uncomfortable, silenced, or even pushed out of their jobs. I'm joined today by the women's rights campaigner Kellie-Jay Keen, who is the founder of the popular grassroots movement Let Women Speak and leader of Party of Women. Kellie-Jay, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, hi, you're welcome.
I'm guessing this is your first HR podcast, so I'm going to see how our expertise crosses over. Are you up for that?
Yes, 100%. Let's do it.
Excellent. So some of our audience will know you well, some of them will know you a little, and some of them won't know you at all. So I guess I'd like to just start by asking you to just tell us a little bit about yourself. And if you don't mind, what you think the biggest misconceptions about you might be, and if there's anything that you'd like to set straight.
I think so my name's Kellie-Jay Keen. I live in the southwest of England. I'm 50, I'm married, I've got 4 children, and I run my own business in order to fund a campaign. And that campaign is to ensure that women don't lose any of our language, primarily, which leads into all of our rights, our spaces, and that bleeds also into child safeguarding. I think women, mothers, are the final frontier between children's danger and predators. And I do it via a platform called Let Women Speak, which is a free speech event that we do all over the world where women come out and voice their concerns. What I think people probably get wrong about me is that I'm hateful, and I'm definitely not. It doesn't matter what shape or identity that threat comes. My concerns are about protecting women.
Okay, and when did you start doing this work and why?
Oh, so 2015, the Conservative government were elected outright. I was firmly on the left at that point. I had no idea that they'd get elected. I joined online forums of women, and I found that loads of men, and I'm talking about really quite clear what we would have called cross-dressers, joining these forums and demanding that they were called trans women and that they use the pronouns she, her. And I had no idea this was happening. And so I started asking questions like, does my 11-year-old daughter have the right to use a female-only space and not see an adult appendage, male appendage? And I was told categorically no. And I was kicked out of all of my sort of online Labour groups and left-wing groups. And in 2018, I put up a billboard with the dictionary definition of the word woman, and that was removed for hate speech. So that's how I started.
And you've faced a lot of opposition, haven't you, for the work that you do? What form has that taken? You've had some trouble with the police and various threats of violence and actual violence, haven't you?
Yeah, well, there's someone serving a sentence at the moment for really quite serious threats against my life. And I do get quite a lot of harassment, but I did an event in 2023 in New Zealand where I genuinely thought I was going to lose my life. I've been interviewed by the police on 4 or 5 occasions, one for being untoward about paedophiles. I thought you could be. Who knew? One for saying you shouldn't castrate a 16-year-old boy. And so, yeah, I've run into quite a lot of opposition. I did a list today, actually, of all the places where I'm banned for saying the things that I say. And that ranges from, I can't sign a petition on change.org, I can't post on Mumsnet, I can't earn any revenue on all the normal platforms, Patreon, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, like everywhere where people like me doing campaigns would sort of raise awareness and money, I've been really penalised. So, and I've just recently been debanked. So it's all fun.
And what do you think motivates your opponents? Because there are people that turn up at your events and don't want the women to speak. That's right, isn't it? What sort of people are they? Is it a mix of some really violent people or are they lost souls?
Oh, I think it's a broad spectrum of people that are brought into that side of the debate, and some might be quite lonely people, confused, rabid activists who don't seem to have any other purpose in their lives. And then you get, it's the most sinister, I think, you get sort of between 50 and 60-year-old sort of union men. So the sort of men that run Unison and other trade unions. And they come and they provide the posters, and you see them sort of whispering into the ears of these sort of silly kids. But just to remind everyone, I just basically say that men can't be women, women can't be men, and non-binary is ridiculous and not a thing, and you shouldn't transition children. And so with that, that means that men aren't welcome in women-only spaces, and that's why these people come and oppose me. Because I guess if you silence women like me, then it really does discourage women from speaking up at all.
And so you're happy to take that role, are you? What motivates you to take that rather than, I don't know, letting someone else do it? Who else is going to do it? But is that how you feel?
Yeah, I say this thing, which is probably a bit corny, but if not you, then who? And I sort of think, I don't know who else is in this sort of position. I'm well placed to do this sort of activism, and to be fair, I'm not bad at it. So I don't know if there is anyone else that could replace my particular role in the movement. But also, it's just the injustice. It's just patently not true, and everyone knows it's not true. So my job really isn't to convince the sort of 5% of people that maybe do think women can be men. My job is to tell all the other people that know it that they can speak and object to the infringement of their rights by men LARPing as women.
So, and women come up to the microphone to sort of speak and say whatever they want to say, right? There's no particular brief. I mean, we'll talk about the workplace bit in a second, but what typically do they say, and what sort of stories have stayed with you the most that you've heard over the years?
It is a really wide range, from somebody who's looking after their mother, who's sort of end of life care, being cared for at home, and the person that comes out to do her final needs requirements from the council is a man who calls himself a woman. So that man potentially was going to be in the home with a very elderly woman who's very frail, who was very uncomfortable and frightened. Her daughter just happened to be there. So there's those sort of stories. Then there's men working in hospitals, also pretending to be women. And you'll note that I really don't use the language of probably diversity and inclusion. I really refuse to call them any sort of women. But these men, there's some nurses that told me there's a couple of men on their ward that call themselves women that wait for that call for a chaperone so they can volunteer themselves. So a woman with an internal exam can actually be in the room with two men. So that's quite harrowing. People with nonverbal children who worry about what happens to their children when they can't take care of them anymore, and they're in a home and they can't have single-sex care. What teachers are teaching in schools. So really every aspect of a person's life. We do get a lot of workplace stuff, but it's every single aspect a woman can expect and needs female-only space and care. Those women are the women that come forward and talk about how that was totally stolen from her, and she doesn't even have a right to speak about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Since this is an HR-based podcast, What jobs did you have before this? And did any of them give you any training for what you're doing now?
No, not really. I was in sales. So I left university. I have a theology degree, and I left university, and I'm an atheist. So I was quite bizarre anyway. And I left uni and I went straight into a sales job, and I only worked for about 2.5 years before I had my children. But I met my husband and we had kids, and I never actually went back to work. So I don't know. I think maybe motherhood gave me this role. I haven't really changed as a person, but I do think when you become a mother, your mortality, your rights, and things that are important become even more important than they were before.
Mm-hmm. Do you really think that your job now doesn't involve sales?
No, my job very much. Oh, well, I guess, yeah, my job does. I mean, I created an entire business in order to fund my campaign. And I have done that since 2018. So it funded the billboard, it funded all my trips abroad. So my tour of the United States of America, I toured Australia, I've toured a bit of Europe. So yeah, I guess look, I'm quite good at sales, and I'm relatively good at marketing and messaging. Like I've discovered that that's quite a talent of mine, that I can very much reduce something down to just a few words to articulate a very, very clear meaning.
Mm. Do you think it's that plain speaking that informs people's opinion of you as being quite tough and quite straightforward? But I mean, you seem to enjoy that. But is that where it comes from? The clarity is read as a sort of toughness, maybe.
Yeah, I also think, look, I deliver. What do I deliver when with this persona, which actually is my own? But I wear too much makeup. I've got bleach blonde hair. And then I speak like this woman. And I think what that message is somebody that everybody knew. Maybe your auntie who was chatty, or a teacher that was quite strict. I think I'm sort of that matriarchal figure, and I think it's a relatability thing. So people think they know me. I think that's really what works.
Mm-hmm. And does it bother you that there are misconceptions about you, or are you trying one by one to turn everybody to your way of thinking?
I don't know if I care too much that there are misconceptions. I think I just care that people have heard, and often that misconception can help somebody think about what it is that they have thought of me. I have met people that said, "Oh, I heard you were a far right Nazi," and I thought that doesn't really. I wonder what she really thinks, and then they will go and examine what I think, and they'll realize that it's perfectly rational and it's the truth. So no, I can't help how people think of me. I've just got to speak and do it sincerely, and hopefully that penetrates.
Since you brought up the far right Nazi thing, I wasn't going to raise it, but since you brought it up, what is that about? If you want to correct that.
Well, I mean, people they start calling you sort of transphobic. If that doesn't work, they might say that you're homophobic, then a racist, then a white supremacist, then a Nazi. And these are very successful tactics of my opponents, like the people that I want to keep out of women-only spaces. It's been a really successful strategy. I mean, if you shout the word racist at someone, for a start, it's incredibly difficult to defend. No matter how you do it as a white woman, no matter how you try and defend being called racist, you just sound racist. If I said I've got black friends, you can't qualify your not racist behavior or persona. You can't do that. So I just don't even bother correcting it. If someone wants to believe something like that about me, there's nothing I can do that will stop them. I just have to carry on.
Okay, so you've been doing this for what, nearly 10 years? You've been listening to women's stories?
It is, yeah, nearly 10 years, yeah.
So you must have had an awful lot of stories from lots of different women. What are the most common stories and kind of complaints, I suppose? That's not quite the right word, that you hear from women at Women Speak events relating to the workplace specifically?
Specifically, I think it's language. So they might be asked to put pronouns in their signatures, although I think that is lessening. So it might be that use of language. Often it's a man using their private spaces. But yeah, I think language is so huge. And then there's other ones where there is definitely AGPs, so autogynephiles, so men that call themselves women, and do so through fetish. And it will be that they bring their whole selves to work. So they'll come in sort of attire that is completely inappropriate for the office, and they'll get away with it. And then even as far as border control, so men working in border control coming in dressed as women, and then the women have to do a pat down because they put metal and things in their pockets. So it goes from really, really quite sinister, very, very upsetting, to just a constant sort of tap, 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 where women just feel that they cannot speak up. So the silencing and the self-exclusion, I think, is one of the most insidious aspects of this particular ideology, where women won't even object in work because they're frightened of being punished.
So there's a couple of things there. There's sort of single sex spaces and requirements at work, and then there's the language piece. So just looking at the single sex spaces bit first, is that, as an example of that, would be something like the nurses who are having to get changed in various hospitals with a man who identifies as a woman, or whatever you'd say, a man pretending to be a woman, or trans woman, or whatever we're saying, and that's there's objections to that. And also, I think you touched on it, the fact that when they do raise it, they're dismissed or even punished for it themselves. So what is that? Because you would think that would be a moment when people might go, oh, hang on a minute, yeah, this doesn't quite seem right. Maybe we've got this wrong. Should we look at this again? But that doesn't seem to be happening in lots of workplaces. We seem to be jumping to protecting the person who we assume is this minority vulnerable person. And it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense quite often with the reality of what we're seeing. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I do. I think what happened way before any of these incidences happened, so way before any of those men used women's changing rooms, the whole workplace had been groomed into accepting these men as the most vulnerable. And then what happens in the workplace is you have these outside training people. They come in and everyone feels really, really great about themselves, that they are so accepting and wonderful. And nobody does that better than women. And we really do kind of run headfirst to try and give away all of our rights by being the most wonderful, inclusive person in the workplace. It's no coincidence that George Orwell writes about these women, and Margaret Atwood writes about the sort of the women that are really willing to sell women completely down the river. And I think that's what happened. So once a woman comes in and complains, that training's been done, those policies have been written. I was sitting next to a woman who was in charge of community nursing for an entire region of the UK, who was rewriting these policies in 2015. So she was rewriting, and it was like community nursing. So it would be nurses going into vulnerable people's homes. And she was just, she was quite happy. And I said, do you think you should do that? Like, what happens if there's a woman on her own and the person that turns up is a man? And she said, oh, I know, it's awful, and just carried on writing the policy. So I think that's what happened. And then those people will be the enforcers, and they feel very powerful and wonderful for being able to tell somebody else that their discomfort really doesn't mean anything.
Do you think they themselves would be fine getting changed in front of a man, what you would call a man pretending to be a woman?
No, absolutely not. And I think that women often rationalize their discomfort. And I guess if you're a 45-year-old woman in charge of these HR policies, then you've already told yourself that you're the sort of person that would be fine about it. Whether or not you really would is a totally different issue.
All right. So coming back to the language issue that you mentioned, I mean, I guess you're referring to things like maternity policies as well, and things like the word mother being replaced by, I saw pregnant employee the other day, and women being erased from things like menopause policies. I don't know how you can even write a menopause policy without using the word woman, but sometimes they manage it. People experiencing menopause kind of thing. I think some of this was encouraged by the lobby group Stonewall, which was kind of designed to help these employers to progress up the Workplace Equality Index, which was their list of the best employers for what they would call LGBT people to work for. Why does language matter so much? You obviously don't feel this is just about being kind and inclusive. what is it about words? And if it's a situation where it's a word like mother, we're talking about trans men, so people that were born women, who will benefit from this. How is that bad for women if we're including more women who like that language?
Well, language erasure works in a couple of ways. There's one way that you dilute what that word means and that it ceases to mean anything at all. And the other way is that you use that word for other people. So once you use the word woman and you include men as women, then it ceases to mean adult human females, and then we don't know who we're talking about. And when you erase the word woman, where we should use the word woman, then that particular sex-based right in the example of maternity ceases to be something that you can identify as a sex-based right.
You mentioned about what you would call men pretending to be women, the older males who transition later in life. I think they're turning to be quite an interesting group in the workplace, and there's a lot of people in their lives who are also in the workplace. So what we're calling trans widows, I hear that they're called, or the children of transitioners. So these are the sort of kind of Caitlyn Jenner types, the kind of Eddie Izzard types, who've got an ex-partner, or perhaps they've got children already from a previous relationship, and they've transitioned later in life. And for some of them, my understanding is that there is a sexual motivation for that. And sometimes it's fine, and other times it's part of quite an abusive dynamic within the family, either with the ex-partner, who's a woman usually, or with the children. Do they turn up at your Let Women Speak events, and what do they have to say about how it feels to be them in the workplace? They're not recognised really at all, are they?
No, they're not recognised anywhere, not by anyone, let alone in the workplace. What they talk about is that, it's just like being hit over the head with a blunt instrument on a daily basis, especially through things like Pride Month, when all the stories in the staff intranet are about these men and how stunning and brave they are, and it's just preposterous in my mind. But I think if you're a trans widow and you've already been shunned by your friendship circle because you're not standing by your stunning and brave husband, and then you get it again in the workplace, and especially most of these women have been coercively controlled, because what happens in that relationship, and it's so common, I feel like I can say that what happens in that relationship, not even some. So what happens in those relationships is the men start with incremental sort of tiny little bits of abuse. That's and it just progresses. So it starts maybe with nail varnish in the home, and then it moves to nail varnish out the home, or it's eyeliner, and it's just a bit of fun, and isn't this great? And before these women know it, they are completely sidelined in their own marriage, and they become a prop to their husband's fetish. And the same with the girls. It's often true, and I hope your listeners and audience actually look this up with the men in their workplaces. These men often transition when their daughters are going through puberty. So that will be a key time for them, either when they first get married, when their wives are pregnant, or when their daughters are going through puberty. And then what they do is they totally encroach upon their daughter's privacy and dignity by talking about going through puberty together. So these are really true, very common. And I think if anybody is on the side of we should just live and let live, these are really vulnerable trans women. I think they need to have a think about how old are these men? How old are their children? And then just think, that man was motivated to wear dresses out of his house when his daughter started having her period. I mean, it really is so grotesque.
So there doesn't really seem to be any understanding across society that this is what motivates some of these men. So I suppose in some ways it's not really reasonable to expect HR departments to be aware of it either. I mean, we've seen acceptance of people like Caitlyn Jenner, and, I didn't know Caitlyn Jenner and, Eddie Izzard, but this has been sort of celebrated in a way. So it's not that surprising that HR people don't quite know what to make of it and just kind of just sort of take it all at face value. Do you have any sympathy for that position?
Of course I do, of course. But I don't even know. I don't think it really matters what the motivation of these men are. I don't think we need to sort of think, well, I find your fetish repulsive. I think we should just say that there is a reasonable expectation that somebody doesn't bring that behavior into work. Like, you don't have to write a policy to say, right, no rubber fetish at work. So you wouldn't expect to have to write a policy to ask men not to bring their fetish to work. And yet here we are. I also think that men, whether or not it's a fetish, and I pretty much think nearly 100% of the time it is. There might be a few exceptions where it isn't a fetish. But let's say I'm totally wrong, and it's the most wholesome, wonderful journey into their true selves. What HR have been doing is saying to women, we don't care what you think. We're not even going to ask you. We are telling you that you have to accept these men as women. Now, I think that's where it goes from being inclusive, happy, lovely, wonderful, aren't we so kind to these men, to a real infringement of women's rights in the workplace. And I think that's where we are. I don't think it really matters why these men are doing it. I don't think it really matters whether anyone is disgusted by them or celebrates them. I think it's just an ideology that is questionable at best, that HR departments have sort of taken on completely, and it totally disadvantages women.
I was talking to Kate Barker from LGBT Alliance a few months ago about how lesbians are affected in the workplace. And I think there's quite a lot of lesbians who turn up to your events as well. And it's about these people who turn up to LGBT staff networks. They've got loads of different names, these things: staff networks, employee resource groups, affinity groups, they're all the same thing. These internal staff groups, which lots of big organizations have. And the LGBT group tends to be pretty lively. And older trans women who transitioned later in life, they would say, are taking a really active role. And that the reason why they're there is that although they're attracted to women, because in their eyes, they too are women, that makes them lesbians. But if you don't believe that they are women and you think that they're still men, then you will see straight men dressed or presenting as women finding a place for themselves in this LGBT staff group. And no one's allowed to question whether those men actually belong there. And Kate was saying that although, some people might be fine with them being there, there's lots of people, particularly lesbians, who prioritise biological sex above this concept of gender identity, who decided to start to self-exclude from those groups because they don't think the biological males who are attracted to women belong in those groups at all. Do you have any thoughts on that group? Do they turn up to your events?
Yeah, of course, lesbians turn up to my events, and I think they feel particularly persecuted. And what we do know is that testosterone, for example, was being sort of given away for free to lesbian groups as far back as like the 70s and 80s. So this is a group that's been targeted both in a way to force transition and the idea that they really are men, which is so homophobic, I can't even begin, to they must accept males in their dating pool, again, pretty homophobic. So I think lesbians have really been squeezed by both sides, and obviously they've had a bit of a bad lot anyway, because they don't generally include men in many aspects of their lives, because they don't need men in many aspects of their lives. And now we've got a whole new attack, which is what is even a lesbian, just a sort of an existential threat. But my answer to this particular conundrum is I personally would like to see all of these networks disappear from all corporations, whether they're race-related, religion-related, sex-related, or sexual orientation, gender identity related. I have no idea what good they do for anybody in the workplace.
I can answer that question a little bit. They started off as literally an informal network for, say, the women in your organisation, so that the junior women could know some senior women and we could all kind of share expertise and whatever. It's been massive mission creep to the point at which we don't know what we're doing anymore. And they started to use them then as kind of sort of in-house expertise.
Like
so you
stakeholders.
could ask, yeah, so let's ask the women's group what they think, as we're doing a new product for women or whatever. And then the next stage of that has been these groups inputting directly into policy. company policy, even though they've got no expertise, all they've got is their lived experience, but that's clearly not enough, and that's clearly makes them the wrong people. So I think you're right, there are some really good questions around that. I mean, I've seen recently somebody said that having staff networks is a really good way to reduce your legal risk as an employer, just in case there was ever a case that gets to employment tribunal where you've got to show that you were inclusive of that group. If you've got a staff network for that group, it helps to make your case that you were being inclusive. And I've never heard that before, but I thought that was a very strange argument, because for me, all I can see is them increasing risk. And if you look at something like the recent case with Melanie Newman and Met Police, you can see how these groups can become quite activisty and actually quite unpleasant, because there's no real guardrails around them, and they get a bit of budget and they get a senior champion and they're off, and there's very little control over them. So I would agree with that. It's a good question. Just to clarify, can men be lesbians at work?
No, they can't be lesbians at home either. So no.
So in your view, men can't be women, so they can't be lesbians, so they definitely can't be lesbians at work. Have I understood correctly?
100%. Okay. Yes, they can't not even for a millisecond, no.
I think I agree with you that I think we need to talk more about how we give more weight to the fact that the way that people present themselves at work has an impact on their colleagues and customers. And I think that issue has been really missing from the conversation so far. We've seen, for example, there have been some issues around the way that some of these individuals are presenting at work in terms of their choices of clothing. During Pride last year, I saw a photo of an HSBC employee in a dress that was so tight you could see the shape of this individual's genitalia, and which looked pretty male to me from where I was sitting, which was taken in the HSBC head office main reception. And I was quite startled by that. I don't know if that individual dresses that way all the time, but that seemed a bit strange to me. There was also a story about an employee at the Department for Work and Pensions who was turning up to work in fishnet stockings, a low-cut black corset, high heels, and a choker. And I think, again, that hadn't landed very well. I think in the end, that was dealt with by people saying, actually, that wouldn't be appropriate for anyone to dress that way. You're presumably not surprised that dress code is becoming an issue in the workplace. Like, is this genuinely how these people want to dress, or are they looking for some kind of reaction from their colleagues? What is that about?
Oh, I think part of the fetish is to make people uncomfortable. So, I mean, earlier you said that these men, they think they're women. I don't think these men do think they're women. I think these men know that they're men, which is why they're so damn entitled. And I think they want other people to pretend that they're women. And it's all part of this sort of, sometimes it's a humiliation part of it. But often it's like their own humiliation or somebody else's humiliation. So that will be part of that. Like J.K. Rowling famously said, dress as you want, or dress as you please. I fundamentally really do disagree with that sentiment. But just on dress code generally, there has been a rapid decline, I think, in professional dress code. So I'd just like to give a shout out for the return to professional attire at work. That would be nice.
Leading on from the issues around dress, I think there's also been issues around behaviour of some of these people. So there are rumours at the moment, I don't know if you heard them, that there are 2 trans women in fairly senior corporate roles who've been managed out of the organisation following harassment claims, and both have been covered up with NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. Now, lots of people who aren't trans identified in any way are also managed out of jobs for lots of reasons. I think the chief exec of Primark has just gone for something or other, some sort of harassment. So it may not be right to focus on this too much, but it's definitely something people are talking about in the corporate world. Do you think there's a realization that it's naive to treat these people as women in every sense, even if they are prepared to treat them as women in some senses? Because however they present, it appears that they are still capable of behaving as badly as any men.
Yeah, I think it's quite naive to treat a man as anything other than a man in any situation. You just have to stick to safeguarding and best practice when it comes to work. And I don't see why anybody gets away with not having to sort of adhere to that. It seems quite bizarre that you would say, Oh, no men allowed in. Oh, okay, you're wearing a dress and you call yourself Janet. Well, you can come in then. And I would wager that the prevalence of inappropriate sexual behavior by a man wearing a dress to work would be higher. Like the risk of it would be higher than a man who wears men's clothes to work. You know, there's still men, so there's a risk. But if you're already coming to work and you are prepared to wear your fetish to work, then I think crossing over what would be appropriate behavior at work would probably be far more likely.
We need to see the numbers on that. I think there is a dawning realization, certainly, that this might not be as it seemed.
Shocker.
Yeah, oh dear. But that's just two cases that I know of at the moment. But it's enough to get people talking about it, that's for sure. Okay, going back to women, I think one of the other objections that I'm hearing quite a lot, having kind of put my head above the parapet talking about this stuff, people come to me, is to say that they're objecting actually more vocally than before about diversity, sort of gender diversity training sessions, where there's a person coming in who's promoting or presenting medical transition, particularly as life-saving care. So any trainers, for example, who are still campaigning for puberty blockers to be given to minors when these have been banned in the UK for being unsafe. So, for example, Katie Neves, who's a trans woman who spoke at Deliveroo a couple of months ago. There's also Bobby Pickard from Trans in the City and Transactual as well. I saw Global Butterflies called the Health Secretary Wes Streeting an anti-trans activist when he took the step to ban puberty blockers. Gendered Intelligence's position isn't exactly clear. It may or may not be relevant that all these organisations are run by older trans women who transitioned later in life. So again, that kind of Caitlyn Jenner crowd. But it's unclear to me what expertise or experience they have that they think is better than the Cass Review and Wes Streeting's decision, which I think are generally thought to be pretty well informed. Meanwhile, you've also got Stonewall, who are still kind of certainly kicking about the corporate, the employer space, although less prominent than they were. I think they seem to be having some financial troubles at the moment, and they seem to be promoting data that's of pretty questionable quality as well. So I think more and more women are saying, hang on a second, are these credible organizations for employers to continue to use for training? Yeah. Like, who are these people coming in? Are they qualified? But quite often the attendance is still mandatory at these things, less so than it was. But still, I think people feel a social pressure to attend these things, and objections to these sessions are definitely still met with hostility and having to come up with an explanation. So I think a lot of women still, they don't want to lose their jobs. Women need to earn money, right? It's not that all these women are, just haven't got the courage. They're making an informed decision based on, I don't want to kick off here. I know I'm going to get no support because I'm the only person that I know who thinks this way. So they're just kind of keeping quiet. I presume none of that surprises you either.
No, it doesn't. And look, on the one hand, I feel great sympathy for them for having to go through it and having to be quiet and keeping a roof over their heads. And the other side of that, I guess, is if we all continue to do that, then nothing changes. I think a lot of women get there. I just wish they'd get there a bit sooner. But there are creative ways of objecting to this by sort of going along and asking very tedious, naive sounding questions and objecting in the session.
I think particularly some of the older women who are in a stronger position in the organisation are now speaking up. I think it's difficult to ask younger women to do that, but I think some of the older women are, and actually sometimes people are saying they find more support than they thought they did. There's still an awful lot of people who just don't understand how complicated this is, and actually you might find someone go, "Oh God, I didn't realise that," and there's a bit more of that than people are realising, I think, going on. And how quickly decisions are made about who these trainers are. There's a sort of circuit that goes on, and if you see someone's already done, Deliveroo or somewhere else, or Barclays or whatever, you assume that they're good. You assume that they're credible, and so they're not properly scrutinised. So there is a sort of scene, and once you're on the circuit, you're kind of in, and nobody really scrutinises it, which I think is a huge mistake.
It's a bit lazy, though, isn't it? If you've got an HR budget for training to do all these different things, I mean, you should be researching what you're spending. It is a bit lazy to sort of say, well, they did it for them, so I thought they were good. It doesn't feel like that's really a job well done. That feels
No.
it's a little bit lazy. But also, we both talked about women. I just want to say, men, can you speak up more, please, in the workplace? I think men should be doing a lot of the talking, raising of the questions, and especially men in positions of power. I don't know. I don't want to say it's sexist, but it is. It's quite sexist that women are really targeted when they speak up. And do you know who picks on the women more than anyone else? Is other women. Other women don't like women who stick their heads above the parapet. And I think that's because we feel ashamed when somebody does it and we don't.
So I think what we're saying is there are different perspectives available on this, and you have not considered this perspective. So we're not saying nobody believes in gender identity or should believe in it. We're not at that point. We're saying, hang on a second, there's a lot of people who don't, and how is this going to land with them? And it doesn't really, none of this makes sense if you don't believe in gender identity. So what are we even doing here? And there's an awful lot of, overreach, I think, within those sessions. I sat in on one which was all about, got into medical transition and how you should encourage your GP to give you a bridging prescription for hormones if you couldn't get on the list for. And I was thinking, wait a second, what this is like unqualified medical advice that's happening in the workplace, and I just thought this is completely inappropriate. So there's a lack of control around that as well. Just one more on this section before we move on. I've heard people saying that there are quite often collections for a colleague's surgery, gender affirming surgery, they would call it. So sort of top surgery, which is a double mastectomy for women. So I know that happened at the insurer Admiral. So there's kind of a whip round and something stuck on the notice board or the equivalent online, asking people to donate because it's such a long wait for NHS surgeries, which has made a lot of people feel very uncomfortable. Also, charities like Mermaids, which is a very controversial charity, being selected as the chosen charity for, say, workplace fun runs or something like that. Whoever's picking that charity, it's quite difficult to object to it. But also, people are feeling very uncomfortable about thinking, hang on a second, what am I funding when I run or donate for this thing? And it just makes people think, oh, I don't know, this is not. This is not a reasonable thing to expect people to have to think about when they're in the workplace.
I think that this has no place in the workplace. And I think it's because it has nothing to do with people's jobs. I can't think of a job where understanding that some people call themselves the opposite sex is at all relevant. I don't think it matters, like if you're in banking, investment banking, if you work in B&Q. I don't really understand how it's at all relevant to going to work, doing your job to the best of your ability, and then going home at night. I don't see why we need to understand that there is a pernicious ideology, or even if we thought it was a great ideology, sweeping the nation. I don't feel it's anything to do with our employer and the way we earn our money.
So my background is working with graduates. I've been campaigning for fair pay for interns for 15 years, and I really care about young people at the start of their career. And I'm worried about how this is all impacting young people. And I went to an event, a rather strange event. If you don't mind, I'd like to tell you about it, because I still feel quite weird about it. And you're one of the only people that I feel like will be able to give me some kind of idea of what happened. So I hope it's not selfish to ask you. It was a Trans in the City event. Now, Trans in the City are a lobby group, and it was in November 2023. It was held at Barclays Bank head office in Canary Wharf. And it was the launch of their Student Ambassadors scheme, which was for students, apprentices, and recent graduates. There were sort of 25 or so young people, and I went along to observe because I was doing lots of research into this area at the time. It was a whole day. It was 8 hours. And I have felt actually really uncomfortable ever since by what I saw that day. Now, Trans in the City, their sponsors have included about 20 really big brands. At the time, they had Google, EY, Amazon, JP Morgan, BP, Clifford Chance. It looks like support has recently dropped to probably just Metro Bank, Gallagher Insurance, Whitbread, who own Premier Inn, Sage Software, and maybe Sky. And I saw that their founder had gone into Bloomberg recently for a fireside chat for Trans Day of Visibility. So, but their support does seem to be dropping a little bit. So the founder, Bobby Pickard, who is a trans woman, middle-aged trans woman, transitioned later in life, and Bobby's friend, Emily Hamilton, who's also a trans woman of the same category, were there. So Bobby was hosting it. Also, there was somebody called Skye Morden, who you might know is a trans-identified taser instructor, exactly, the police person. So from West Midlands Police, and also Joel Cooper, who's the UK Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper's son. And also, I think Eva Echo, who's the one I think was not very nice about you, was not there, but has been involved with Trans in the City previously. I don't think Eva was there that day. Anyway, we were told by Barclays head of DEI, who was hosting it, that we could use any bathrooms we liked, as their policy at Barclays is in 25% of their offices is that people can use whichever bathroom they like. I'm since not quite sure that they're right on the law on that one. But basically, there was a gender neutral loo, but all the trans women who were there that day all used the ladies' loo. And the whole idea was about kind of creating this network of young people who are trans and non-binary, identifying as trans and non-binary. And the idea was this idea of bringing them all together, and that these people organizing this event would be creating a sort of pipeline into kind of city jobs, really, pairing them with mentors who were already in senior roles, who were also trans identified. What happened at the event was there was a really strong focus on the threat of discrimination and hostility that this group of young people would face in the workforce, which I felt was being amped up disproportionately to what I know employers are like. And then there was also something which seemed to me like love bombing, and it was telling these young people that they were really special and really amazing, and that the employers really needed them because they had such amazing knowledge, and that actually young people are quite often much smarter than older people. There wasn't very much talk about gender dysphoria, which I understand is this distress that some people can feel. The only reference to it was that it was presented as a symptom of someone's innate transness, rather than, I thought, people were transitioning because they felt gender dysphoria and they were trying to correct that. But that didn't seem to be quite the way it was presented. Of the young people who spoke, a lot of them said they had ADHD or were autistic. So they seemed like quite a lost and vulnerable group. Particularly at the start of people's career, they are generally pretty vulnerable anyway, and they're pretty lost. But this seemed to me like quite a highly vulnerable group. So if you don't believe in gender identity, then what you're looking at is middle-aged men presenting themselves as women, promoting some rather strange ideas to an audience of quite vulnerable people at the head office of Barclays for 8 hours in Canary Wharf, which I thought was strange. At one point, a young woman stood up, who said that she'd been worried about, she must have been 21 or 22. She said she'd been really worried about coming out to her manager as non-binary, but she needed to because she needed to take 10 weeks off for her top surgery. But happily, the conversation with the manager had gone well, and so it was just, the conversation just moved on at this event. And I sat there thinking, what are we normalising here? And I was thinking about this girl, and I've thought about her quite a lot since, because I've met detransitioners since then. And I thought, I wonder what happened to her. And I also wondered at the time what her manager thought, and whether the manager who she'd explained all this to, does the manager think this is the solution to this young woman's problems, or does she think it's a huge mistake? I think this young woman said she didn't have much family support either. And I wondered if it's too much to put on to managers and colleagues, expecting young people's decisions to be affirmed like that, and that would weigh, if I was that manager, I think that would weigh heavily on my conscience, that I hadn't said something. What could I have said? What should I have said? And being asked to either celebrate or affirm, or even just not say, are you sure this is the right decision? I think that would be really difficult. And the fact that all this was happening at this very swanky corporate office was really jarring to me. It was a very, very strange day. I don't think I'll ever forget it, actually. I actually feel a bit emotional talking about it now. And I think about her quite a lot. Yeah, sorry, I feel a bit emotional. This is unexpected and somewhat unprofessional. What do you think?
I'm not surprised. Well, I've met detransitioners. I've met a girl who, after 6 months of having her breast removed, totally regretted it. You know, this is not even... These decisions sometimes don't stay the right decisions for these often adolescents, because they don't seem very grown up. They don't last. And if they do, then maybe it's 10 years. But I think asking a manager to sign off the time off, I mean, it's everywhere, isn't it? It's everywhere, and nobody is accountable because these policies are in place. So really, what would be the moral thing to do as that manager? Well, it would be to say no. Would be truly the moral thing to do would be to say, no, I'm not going to sign off. Is that going to stop her doing it? No. But does that mean that you're not part of it? Yes. Does that mean you risk your job? Potentially, because what these individuals have, because I believe anybody that wants a double mastectomy, anybody that goes to work in a different costume and identity, they're an activist. They're not. It's not a quiet thing that they're doing on their own. They're an activist. They will poison any workplace. They will get away with things that other people can't get away with, which breeds resentment from other people. You know, if she gets 10 weeks off and then a woman has, you know, and it's paid, I don't know if it's paid leave or unpaid leave, and then somebody wants to go and visit someone who's unwell in the other side of the world and they're not given it, which I would imagine happens all the time in work. These people have they are a special caste where they are allowed to do things that other people aren't. And I think it's really, really detrimental to all workplaces. So I think it's really the responsibility of government to get this sorted, to stop anybody being able to identify as the opposite sex. That's going to help the manager, who then doesn't have to. We have to take away the privilege of this ideology, the privilege it brings, and also how trendy and attractive it is. It needs to be like a sideshow in somebody's life if they so desire, and I hope nobody desires it, but I can't control everybody. But from a work point of view, I think it's completely irresponsible for those people taking home really like hundreds of thousands in salaries, for somebody on sort of 60 to 80,000 to have that burden of that young woman slicing off her healthy breasts. But, you know, we have an NHS that does it. And NHS is the biggest employer in the country. But yeah, I think you can console yourself that you're doing something, you're adding to a conversation in a place where maybe these conversations are very difficult to have in the workplace. And someone's going to hear it. And I guarantee, even already, someone will have not gone and had their breast removed on the basis that they might have just tuned in to one of your podcasts, which meant they really looked at this whole topic and they would have changed their mind. Like I say that with absolute certainty.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get the conversation moving, but it's taking me to some strange places, but I'm sure that's part of it, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Well, I doubt if you've even hit kind of like I've got women who work in border control, border force, who talk about AGPs that work in border force that are allowed to search women. I mean, there's definitely, I definitely know a woman who was having an internal exam and the chaperone that came in was a man. You know, this is sexual assault on a grand scale, and it's everywhere.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get at a moment there.
It just creeps up on you though, doesn't it? Because I'm sure she's
probably quite good, Kelly.
Well, I'm sure you can hear her, you can still see her, I'm sure, and hear her voice. The thing that has most impacted me is women talking about their children. And one woman said, I will never hear her voice again. Like once her daughter started taking testosterone. And I think I can hear the women's voices talking about their homeless children, their daughters with radical hysterectomies, and all of this. And I just that very calmly, she said, "I will never hear her voice again." And I was like, "Oh, that's a big hit."
So there's a lot to think about, for sure. I talked about this in another episode, but essentially, it felt to me like employers were lobbied, basically, without realizing they were being lobbied. And I saw that happening sort of 2017, 2018. People might slightly disagree with that, but that was when I saw it. And and people just sort of trusted Stonewall, basically, which had an amazing reputation at the time. And it wasn't clear then that they had changed direction and changed their goal quite significantly. And it felt like a kind of organic movement. And I think it was partly because of people like Caitlyn Jenner, kind of, Haley from Coronation Street. And it was kind of a moment, I think. And the market was flooded with other activist groups, as well as Stonewall, who was selling this gender diversity training. And employers didn't really do any due diligence on the people who were coming in or what they were going to present. But because this aligned with their own politics, objections on the grounds that there was no balance were kind of dismissed and silenced. And that no debate thing came in at the same time as the thing itself. So anybody who did object, and there were people who were thinking, I'm not sure about this, hang on a second, what are we saying? Yeah. They were instantly told. There was no moment before they realized what was happening. It was too late to say, oh, hang on, this sounds a bit much. The moment had gone. It was really that quick. I think what happened also is that some of the trainers coming in are presenting some content which actually undermines what they already knew about the Equality Act. So so the DEI people are bringing stuff in, but the HR people will be in there in the training session as well. They're actually sitting there, in effect, making themselves stupider by listening to this stuff, which is then undoing some of the information they've already got. So, for example, you see them having this idea that there's a hierarchy of protected characteristics under the Equality Act because they are told that trans people who identify as trans are the most vulnerable. So therefore, you must always go to protect them at every stage. So I think we've created a muddle there. And I think the people listening to it are the same people who should have known that something was wrong. And I think that's what's happened there. You probably aren't that familiar with the CIPD guidance, are you?
No.
So in employers' defence, for a second, the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development came out with this, which is the Transgender and Non-Binary Inclusion at Work Guide, which was published in September 2023, which was about 5 years after they actually needed it, in my opinion. It was highly criticised by employment lawyers. I know Legal Feminist did a really good thread on X, and I know Sex Matters wrote to the CIPD, including their massively overpaid chief executive, Peter Cheese, to flag some major problems with it. Another version of it was published in October 2024, which is slightly better. Unfortunately, nobody knows about the new one because it's behind a paywall, whereas the first one was public. And it was also very quietly uploaded, whereas the first one was very widely publicised. So basically, most UK employers are still using this old one, which was the official CIPD guide for about 12 or 13 months. And during that period, many of them will have baked in its advice into their own policies before the second one even came out. This is the HR industry's official body. So they claim to have included input from a broad range of stakeholders. Can you confirm whether they phoned you?
No, they did not.
I didn't think so. They also didn't consult Sex Matters, LGBT Alliance, or the Women's Rights Network. But they did consult Stonewall, Gendered Intelligence, Global Butterflies, Transactional, as well as some staff groups, LGBT staff groups from Unison, Wix, and Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I don't know how these people are qualified to input into this document. That's not really clear. So it's probably no surprise that this 32-page document is very one-sided and written in activist language. You've presumably never read it.
No.
Have you seen it? I don't recommend it. It basically starts with a glossary of terms. The first one is cis, which many women find very offensive. It misrepresents the law in many places, which actually creates risk for employers when surely the point is to reduce risk. There's lots of details in it as well, which raised eyebrows with sensible HR people. So, for example, there's a recommendation to consider giving paid time off for gender-affirming hair removal appointments. Also consider producing multiple lanyards and email addresses for gender fluid colleagues to give them options depending on how they choose to identify from day to day. I'm assuming from your face wouldn't be supportive of that one.
No,
no, that's a no. But for me, so there are some details in it which seem frankly quite strange. And just, even if you don't think they're strange, it's quite a big ask on HR departments who are actually busy with other stuff, and your IT department who also might not want to be doing all this stuff with the multiple email addresses. But for me, the biggest problem is that it doesn't leave any space for colleagues to politely say that they don't believe that it's possible to change sex and to kind of decline to participate in any of this stuff. So there are brief references to the Maya Forstater case and the kind of begrudging acceptance that people have a right to hold and express gender critical views, but just as long as they don't tip into harassment. But I don't see, when I read the whole document, I don't see how that is compatible with the vision that they present as a supposedly inclusive environment for people who identify as trans and non-binary. I just don't see how those two work together. So if you believe in gender identity, the document just about works, I think, although many HR people, would say that the list of accommodations is excessive. But if you don't, then it's actually just plain weird to be going to such great lengths to include one group's requests and leaving no space for other objections, I think. So there's this kind of, like, for example, page 4, if anyone happens to have it who's listening, page 4, focus on authenticity, empowering transgender and non-binary workers to express their authentic self in the workplace and showing outward acceptance when they do. The reaction from Legal Feminist was, what form would that take and how can employers properly demand it? It sounds awfully like compelling professional of a faith that employees may not share. So I guess, two questions are coming up for me, really. Is there an implied demand on colleagues that they have to pretend this individual has changed sex even if they don't? And also, what if we suspect that there is a sexual motivation for some of the way for the way that some of these individuals are choosing to present? It just doesn't seem to work. Have you got any thoughts?
Well, number one, it sounds like you should give them a round of applause every time they come to work in a short skirt. That's what it sounds like, that you should be over complimentary. And it sounds like it's written by a man who likes wearing fetish gear to work. That's what it sounds like, because it's this consistent affirmation and celebration of them, which goes along with everything I know about these men, which is far too much. I know far too much about these men. There are places in my mind I wish didn't exist, where these men do exist. And for the rest of it, I find it really difficult in this conversation to put myself in a position of thinking for 1 second that this should be taken seriously at all at work. It just is so mad that in some instances, it's literally people making life or death decisions or deciding on how a market changes and potentially impacts, like, inflation in our country. And to think that they are having these conversations, when there's millions, if not billions of pounds trickling through their fingers on a daily basis in these companies, that they are spending any time whatsoever worrying about what I see is some men who enjoy wearing fetish gear to work, creating documents and policies in which they can continue to do that, and anyone not understanding what's really going on is frankly peculiar. That, like, why would any man wear a short skirt to work? Like, what good motive would there be? Like, I don't really understand why anyone's tolerating it. And I think it's because everybody's forgot that policy doesn't really explain human behavior and our responses to human behavior. Most people would recoil at Jeremy, age 60, coming to work in a PVC leather, mini skirt and stilettos. Most people would think that was, at best, hilarious. And at worst, really quite uncomfortable. And then to look at a policy document that basically said, well, now you have to celebrate Jeremy and tell him well done, and hope his wife's not too upset, it is nuts. But I wonder if that same organisation has done, like the HR organisation has done a guide for how we should treat women at work, and where those policies don't match, or how we treat religious minorities at work and how those policies don't interact very well. And I hate to use religious minorities because I don't think any woman should have more right to access a space than any other. But we will have policies based on the Equality Act for these religious minorities that won't be compatible at all with these policies that say that Jeremy is the most vulnerable woman in that entire company. It just doesn't make any sense.
So I'm doing quite a lot of digging into what has gone wrong with DEI more broadly, and trans inclusions specifically. And I'm really reaching the conclusion that I think the deepest wound that employers have inflicted on themselves is not on the relationship with customers, which is what we would call go woke, go broke, but instead on their own workforce. I think what they've effectively done is that the critical thinkers have left, and that the talent that they had attracted and nurtured, they've since kind of squandered. Anyone who's asked any questions about this has either been silenced or kind of pushed out the door. I think that's why we're seeing some really strange stuff happening within organisations, particularly cases that are getting to employment tribunal. I think it's just a case that the sensible people left 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Slowly they've left, and all you're left with is the people who are just really into this stuff and who are prepared to take it to employment tribunal because they believe so strongly. There's no one there anymore that says, hang on a minute, this is a conflicted issue, contentious issue, different opinions. They've gone. And I think that's why you're seeing what you're seeing. So, yeah, I think it leaves organisations in really bad shape to cope with the challenges of, the looming recession, of the impact of AI and everything else. You've just impoverished your own workforce by doing this.
If you leave mediocre people with power, then they will use it. And I think that's, if your critical thinkers have gone and your experienced HR people who genuinely understand a happy, content, well-respected workforce work very well for a company, and everyone rubs along together and it's wonderful. And I think then if you're left with just people who like to invent more ways of telling people what to do, then this was always going to happen.
In terms of solutions, I would love to say that the CIPD is going to get their act together and produce some decent guidance. I don't see that happening. I think employers are going to have to sort themselves out with this one. I think they need to crack the whip with their own lawyers, who frankly are not stepping up either. I think the law firms, if they're external, should be stepping up to flag this to employers. I don't see enough from them. Lots of HR directors are saying, why are we not hearing about the Sandy Peggy case from our lawyers? Why are we only seeing it in the news? What's going on there? So there's some digging to be done there. I think HR directors or above, so it needs to go really senior, need to do a reckoning on policies and training. We need proper input from women's groups, from all sorts of groups, to go back to these documents, proper quality control of who these trainers are coming in and who's inputted to that policy. And I think everybody needs to be retrained in the Equality Act, because a lot of people just don't seem to know it at all. I spoke to one HR director who said he thinks less than 10% of HR and DEI people even know the basics of the Equality Act. And I spoke to another HR director who said that she'd interviewed somebody for an HR job recently who was CIPD qualified and could not name the 9 protected characteristics. So I think what we're looking at here is beginning to look to me like a collapse in standards across HR. We've been busy doing bake sales for Palestine when we should have been doing, the basics of the Equality Act. So those are my solutions. Unless you've got any to throw in, I just wanted to do predictions. I think employers will continue to lose good people through this until they sort it out. I think retention has been the biggest self-inflicted wound from this, from the employer perspective. I think it will have an impact on their employer brand. One of the things I'm worried about with the NHS is what message that sends to future talent who you would want to attract to your organisation. That's what employer brand is. It's all about how people view you as an employer. And I can't see that you're going to be appealing to women if you're seeing all these cases of all these women being so badly treated by the NHS. And I don't know whether there'll be a government inquiry. I know there's probably, thoughts about whether that would be effective or not. But I think it would be interesting if there is. I think the CIPD should be on a panel at some point having to talk about how they let this happen, because this is supposed to be the HR industry body. And where are they on this? And they've been giving bad advice, which I think has become baked in because they have these people development partners, of which the NHS England is one. Lots of government departments are on that list now as well. What advice is going in? And why are these the people who keep having all these court cases? I mean, I just think there's been a collapse in standards, really. Do you have any predictions, really, about how you see this going, just to close on?
Well, I think it will either take a lurch to the right in politics, and that might be a blessing or a curse, but it will definitely take that. And look what's happened in America, like overnight. Nobody's saying, please, can we let these boys run in girls' races? You know, nobody's sort of going crazy trying to bring that back. Now Trump has sort of put an end to it, so it could take politics. But I think it needs a really meaty, really massive case. And I don't think the cases we've seen so far have been anywhere near scandalous enough. You know, if that woman who had been, in my mind, sexually assaulted had reported the NHS for sexual assault, I wonder whether we might see something. But it's got to be the thing that people look at the Daily Mail sidebar and can't resist. It's got to be a story that's so juicy and scandalous that everybody wants to read it. And then you only need to take down one employer really successfully in a way where people think, well, they totally agree. And I think, you know, the cases they've been good, but they haven't been really exciting. And maybe that's the press's fault, but that's what I think. And this this can't last because it's not true. And eventually people will look at profits and they'll say, oh, something's not working. I mean, I guess that's ultimately how corporations will change.
Yeah, I think that's happening already. The corporate sector has been the one to watch because I mean, you know, mistakes they've made with DEI overall, but they have that profit driver which is pushing them in that direction. And I think, you know, bad DEI is bad business, and not just the go woke, go broke consumer aspects of it, but also internally. I think they're doing huge damage to their own organisations from the inside. I don't know. I think it's going to take a lot longer for the arts, the charity sector, universities, but I think the corporate world will lead on it. So anyway, let's hope we'll start to see some change, at least some balance coming back, and a different variety of views. Thank you so much for your time. Was there anything else you wanted to say? You've been a fabulous guest. Did you enjoy the conversation?
Yes, I did. Thank you so much. I think it's just so necessary, isn't it? Like everyone's doomed with this stuff. It really does. Like I talk about poisoning, which I know sounds like a really nasty word, but it really does. You just get one drop of this DEI nonsense, and everyone's held to ransom. I mean, I'm banned from my GP because I questioned the pronoun badge of the receptionist, and so I got banned from my GP practice. Like this is dangerous stuff. I just hope those that have profited from it end up being punished. That's all.
A cheery end. Thank you so much, Kellie-Jay. You've been a fabulous guest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really nice to meet you.